So, first story. Back in 2019, my grandmother passed away. Bless her heart. Sweet lady. Won't get into that. There's a whole story there. Obviously, she was old, ripe old age, like 93 or 96 or something. So she lived a long time. She had a great life. Bless her heart. But nonetheless, I inherited her car from Salt Lake City, and it just so happened to be right at the time that I was relocating from LA to Boston, and I needed a car, and so I drove up to Salt Lake from LA with a friend, and then picked up the car, 1995 Ford Taurus, purple. Or, maroon, I think is the official color, but really it looks raspberry. It's the color of raspberry. And picked it up. Took it on the highway for the first time that day just to test it out. And the wheels had not been aligned. They were not weighted. Like, Grandma was just putting around at like 20, 25, 35 miles an hour. Once we hit like 55, we didn't even dare go past 55. But once we hit 55, the thing was so violently shaking. We thought it was going to just fall apart. It was, it was crazy. And like literally the interior paneling inside the doors is coming off from this experience. That's how violent the rattling was. And so we named her the Raspberry Rattler. So that's her name. So when you hear me say the Rattler, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about my car, my 95 Ford Taurus. Anyway, drove that thing all the way to Boston. I was in Boston for 3 years, what I talked about before. I was in Boston during COVID, which is what opened my eyes and red-pilled the shit out of me. Then I drove her down to Tampa, dropped off my Ethereum mining rig. I was an Ethereum miner. That's how I got into crypto. And then I moved to Mexico for a year, and I did that whole thing in Mexico, which I think I talked about before also. It's another story for another time. Anyway. Drove back from Dallas to LA, started the podcast, and so she was in LA for a little while, and up until recently. So I got this job in Georgia, and I needed to drive out there from LA. I need to have the car in Georgia. There's not I'm out in the central Georgia. There's no Lyft, there's no Uber, there's let alone buses and trains. Or any kind of public transportation. It just simply doesn't exist. It's a very rural area, which I'm very grateful for. It's a constitutional carry state, so I got my guns too. That was one of the first things I did when I got here. So anyway, I had to drive out here. So before I took the trip, I got her serviced. One of the things that I absolutely had to do was get the air conditioner replaced. The air conditioner died in Boston, which I could handle. But if I was, driving from LA to Georgia, you're basically going along the Mexican border for a good time through Arizona, New Mexico, and even Texas, until you get through. It's like central Texas. So that was gonna be like 14 or like 20 hours through that section of driving. There's no way I'm gonna do that without AC. So I had to get the AC replaced, and I was willing to pay whatever it took. And long story short, I went with this one mechanic that said, yeah, I can get it done by this date. I had a date that I needed to leave. It was I think it was a Wednesday. I was like, I have to be out on Wednesday. So I need it done on Tuesday. And he was like, yeah, no problem. I'll get it done by then. So on Tuesday, I'm expecting to get the car by the end of the day. And he calls me up and he goes, hey, do you have a kill switch installed in this car? Kill switch? It's a 95 Ford Taurus. Why in the hell would I have a kill switch in this thing? Anyway, he goes, oh, don't worry about it. Okay, we'll figure it out. They didn't figure it out. He calls me up and says, hey, I think it's the computer. I think it's the computer module. So we're going to have to get that replaced. So tomorrow morning, if you want to give me a call and let me know, I can get you prices on that. I'm like, the computer is fine. The car was starting just fine when I dropped it off. You guys did something to screw it up. You need to fix it. Anyway, so he was convinced it was the computer, and so I said, all right, well, I'm not gonna buy this part from you because I know you're gonna upcharge me a ton on the price. of the unit. So I'll go find one myself. So I did. I confirmed with him that it was the right part. I drove to Pomona from Alhambra, which is like 45 minutes in LA traffic in the summer without an air conditioner. Picked up the part, drove it back to him, gave it to him, and I was like, "Is this the right part? Are you sure?" And he was like, "Yep, that's right." So they plug it in and it still doesn't start. So I'm like, okay, so it wasn't the computer, it was something else that you guys screwed up. So a whole day gets burned. I'm supposed to be on the road on the way to Arizona to visit my mom, and she had just moved out there. And then it turns out, luckily, they did figure out what it was, and they screwed up the wiring. And so they fixed the wiring that they screwed up in the process of installing the air conditioner, and sent me on my way. And then I woke up in the morning, the next day, which was the morning that I was supposed to be on the effing road at like 6 in the morning and be out of here, with a 24-hour delay. And the left rear tire is all the way down to the ground. I mean, I was just like, this whole thing up to this point was just like, why does God hate me, So luckily I had AAA, called AAA, and I said, yeah, like this thing is dead flat and needs some help. And so I slowly drove it out of the little parking area behind the apartment, which there's no way a truck was going to get back there. Slowly drove it out there. By the way, this car is fully packed with all my So, it's like the car is leveled like this, driving slowly. Like, it's just crazy. Got it out into the street, and I talked to the guy, and he said, was it an immediate flat, or was it a gradual? I was like, it was gradual. And so he's like, well, why don't I just pump it up right now, and then you can just drive to the nearest mechanic, and they can get it sorted out. Okay, cool. Drive to the nearest mechanic, and I make it, and the tire's fine. So it was a slow leak. And then I get there, and they start checking stuff, and they find that it's the valve. It's just the valve. They dunk the tire in water to try and find the leak from by observing air bubbles. And when they rotated it and the valve went under the water, air was just coming out of the valve. So it was just a valve, and they were like, "Oh, we can replace that." And so that took like 2 minutes. The guy pulled the old valve out, threw it away, put a new valve in, and it was fine. And then I went to the lead of the mechanic, and I was like, "Hey, how much do I owe you? You really saved my ass here." And he shook my hand, and he just said, "Hey, have a safe drive to Georgia. No charge for you, my friend." I gave him a 5-star review on Google, and I hope it helps them, because they deserve it. They were fantastic and very helpful for me. And so I was able to get on the road early, still early-ish in the morning, later than I'd like, but it was still early in the morning, and I was with only a 1-day delay. So that was my Rattler story, which was insane. And then the whole drive to Arizona, I was absolutely nervous the whole time, just like constantly looking, changing my rearview mirror to look down at the tire, like, is it okay? Does it look fine? I can't tell. Like I would jiggle in the lane a little bit to see how it feel. Like, is the tire pressure getting low? Every time I'd gas up, I'd go to the air pump and check the pressure, and the pressure was fine, and I was like, okay. So it was absolutely nerve-wracking, but I finally got to Arizona without any problems, and the AC absolutely worked beautifully. The AC works so well, I can't even run it on maximum, because it was too cold. in the middle of the summer of the supposed climate crisis that we're facing, the air conditioner worked too well, and so that was a pleasant surprise. So I made it to Arizona, visited my mom. She had just moved out there. She got a nice new place, which was very nice, very very like. It's the kind of place my mother should be living in the whole time. Places that she had in California were just absolute garbage. At least the most recent ones. The first couple places she stayed at were fine, but the last few places were just terrible. So anyway, that was the Rattler story. So the journey in total. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the journey in total. So I went from LA to Tucson, Arizona, and by way of Phoenix, because my grandmother is in Phoenix. So I stopped to visit my grandmother for a couple hours, hang out with her and talk with her, which is great. Love talking with my grandma. She's a fabulous lady. Did some IT troubleshooting for her. Got her Wi-Fi all sorted out. Got her printer network issues sorted out. So that was fun. Talked a little bit about Bitcoin. She's Bitcoin curious, I would say. So in telling her about the job I was doing in Georgia, that brought up Bitcoin, and we talked about that a little bit more. I actually quasi orange pilled her the last time I hung out with her at the beginning of the year. So that was great. That was a lot of fun. But that drive was about 7 hours. So from LA to Phoenix was about 7 hours, and then it was an hour and a half from Phoenix to Tucson, just a short little drive. So I get into Tucson late in the evening. My mom and I go hang out, have dinner, have a few drinks, and had a good time. And then the next day, then I spent the next day in Tucson with my mom, hung out with her and her friends, Tom and Sarah, who are I don't know where they're originally from. I know Tom is originally from Boston, and they were in California. That's how they met my mother. And then they are the ones that actually convinced her to move out to Arizona, which is where they're at now. So anyway, had lunch with them, which was great. And there's another story tied in with the friends of my mother, Tom and Sarah, which I will later in this video I'm going to give you a very detailed story, verbalization of the story. There you go. So, after the day hanging out with my mom and her friends again, next morning I got up very early in the morning and drove to Dallas. Well, actually, just outside of Dallas. It's a small town called Cleburne. It's about 45 minutes southwest of Fort Worth. And I hung out with my aunt and uncle. That drive was 14 hours, nonstop. I ate in the car. I only stopped to gas and go to the bathroom. That's it. I drove the entire 14 hours in total. After gas stops and bathroom stops, it was about 15 and a half hours. So I left at 6 a.m. on the dot from Tucson, and I didn't get to my aunt and uncle's house until 11 p.m. Basically, showed up, had one quick drink, went to bed, and passed out, and it was great. And then hung out with them the next day, which was cool because they took me to a winery in Texas. I did not know wineries in Texas existed, and the one we went to was actually great. The wine was actually good. And it was a tiny thing. They only had 88 members, and their cap was 100. So we're talking small little winery out in the middle of nowhere. That was very cool. Hung out with them for a day. Next day, did the same thing again. Out the door at 6 a.m. on my way to Nashville, Tennessee to hang out with my friends Grant and Lila, who I love to death. So that was a 12-hour drive on the books, about 13 hours after stops and gas, which I did the same thing again, eating in the car, only stopping for gas and bathroom breaks. Stretched my legs a little bit. So I listened to a lot of audiobooks, listened to a lot of YouTube videos that I downloaded. And then the following day, hung out with Grant and Lila out in Nashville. And then this ties into some stories again I'm going to tell later, because the day that I hung out in Nashville, I went to Bitcoin Park. And if you don't know what Bitcoin Park is, it's basically a two-building complex, two small buildings right next to each other that used to be like music studios / living quarters for a band called Georgia Florida Line. And they sold the property to these two guys that bought it and said, we're going to turn this into a Bitcoin haven. And members pay an annual fee to have 24-hour access to this small complex, and utilize these facilities for anything they want to do, including podcasting, because it was a music studio, so there is a full-blown studio and every room in the building is sound treated and perfectly acoustically treated, so that you can, and also you can plug into the main studio from any room. There's a panel on the wall. So all you got to do is set up a table, strap some mics onto the table, plug into the wall if you want to pipe into the master studio, for any kind of master processing. Should you want to do that. So it's absolutely amazing. It's beautiful. It's new. It's freaking high quality construction, and it's just amazing. And then of course it's just filled with a bunch of Bitcoin people, anything from developers to just for example, the boss running the company that was hiring me to work out in Texas. He has a membership, and so he operates the business out of Bitcoin Park, which is super cool. And this was actually my third time visiting Bitcoin Park, or no, I'm sorry. This was my second time visiting Bitcoin Park. The first time I ran into him by complete and total accident and happenstance, and then the second time I visited, I ran into him again by complete and total accident. Like literally, I wasn't even going to Bitcoin Park. I was just walking past it exactly at the same time that he was leaving it, and he was walking outside, and we literally ran into each other on the sidewalk. It was just like, man, I can't seem to come here without running into you. That was funny, but I did go and visit Bitcoin Park later for an event in the evening, and that's going to be another a topic for one of my stories later. So definitely check that out. So anyway, next morning, got up not too early and drove down to Georgia because it was only a 5-hour drive, and then I made it here, and here I am in Georgia in my apartment, which you can't see. But it's just a cute little 2-bedroom apartment, super affordable, and I'm really happy with it so far. A few little quirks and interesting construction nuances that I've had to deal with, but other than that, it's great, and I'm happy with it. Landlord's fantastic, and the little town of this little town is great too, and the people are great, so no complaints there. So that is the story of my journey. Cheers.